Welcome to the Alaskaland podcast, stories from the Fairbanks North Star Borough's past, present, and future, with your host, Mayor Bryce Ward. Each episode, we'll sit down with Fairbanks' most interesting characters for a fascinating conversation about where we've been and where we're going. And now, Mayor Ward.
All right, welcome everyone. It's the Alaskaland podcast where we're talking past, present, and future. Today we've got a special guest, Steve Mitchell. We're actually here with Steve in the Wickersham House. Steve, maybe you want to introduce yourself and let folks know who you are?
Well, my name's Steve Mitchell. Welcome to the Wickersham House. I've been in Fairbanks now for 46 years and captivated by its fascinating history. The Tanana Yukon Historical Society operates the Wickersham House Museum, which the building itself is owned now by the Fairbanks North Star Borough. And it's been a great cooperative partnership. The house was brought out here from its original location, I believe, in the early 70s. It was originally located at First and Noble, right where Ron Chevron is. And fortunately, when Standard Oil built that gas station, they donated the house to the city at that time. And it was brought out here and refurbished and restored as a museum. And it is quite a unique dwelling in the history of Fairbanks. For those that don't know, James Wickersham was appointed a federal district judge in 1900 by President McKinley. He came north from Tacoma, Washington to Eagle, Alaska. He built a courthouse in Eagle. Eagle is right on the border on the trail to the Klondike gold fields. And he built a courthouse in Eagle and traveled up and down the Yukon River by dog team and stern-wheeler holding court. He held court in Nome during their great gold rush in 1901. Sailed to the Aleutians, held a floating court in Dutch Harbor, set up the court in Valdez. Then in 1903, when the gold rush is really heating up here in the interior of Alaska, he decided to move the seat of his district court here, and he arranged to have the place named Fairbanks after his benefactor, Senator Charles Fairbanks of Indiana. Now, the judge was on the bench for nearly 8 years, and then he was elected the non-voting delegate to the United States Congress. And as such, he was Alaska's sole point man in Washington for many years. Among his achievements at that time were founding what would become the University of Alaska, securing the financing for the construction of the Alaska Railroad, having Mount McKinley Denali designated as a national park. Back in 1903, he had personally led the first attempt to climb Mount McKinley. Though that climb was not successful, there's a Wickersham Wall named for him on the mountain. So he built this house 1904 to 1906. He built it himself. He built it for his wife in the hopes that she would find life in Fairbanks more comfortable than the log cabin in Eagle. It's the first milled lumber frame house in Fairbanks. Everything else was a log structure.
That's amazing. So this is the first frame house in Fairbanks. You said 1904.
Yeah, built 1904 to 1906. He was very busy as a judge, so in his spare time over those 3 summers, 04, 05, 06, he built the house. He was an experienced carpenter before he became a lawyer. It's quite amazing that he took the time to build such an impressive structure, and it's even more amazing and fortunate that we have it today.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it sounds like a man after my own heart. I'm a contractor too, so that's amazing that he was a judge, a carpenter, a mountaineer. What else did Judge Wickersham do?
Well, he was what we would call an autodidact. He he wrote a fascinating memoir of his time in the North called Old Yukon. And he also compiled a bibliography of Alaskana literature going back to the 1700s. And he was an avid book collector, and the bulk of his personal book collection, it formed the basis for the Alaska State Library in Juneau.
Wow, that's amazing. And one of the original founders for the university here in Fairbanks is what
he was the guy who spearheaded the ceremony up there on the hill where they laid the cornerstone for the university. And of course, he had several community leader partners, but it was Wickersham's effort that made that happen.
That's amazing. Maybe could you give a little bit of insight into what was it like to be a judge in the pioneer frontier of Alaska?
Well, his judgeship, over that near 8-year period, he adjudicated 1,726 cases, which is an enormous output. And of that number of cases, only 10 were ever reversed on appeal. Now, a judge in those days, he was a judge for all matters. It could be mining disputes, could be divorce, could be burglary, could be murder. His courts handled everything that came across the docket. And it was, an amazing position of power. But to his credit, Wickersham demonstrated great integrity and responsibility. Not to say he wasn't a pugnacious opponent with great foes as well as many allies, especially later on after his judgeship when he was in the political sphere. He had alliances with all sorts of historical figures, and then you read a couple years later, they once were allies, and then now they're foes. It just was an incredible, much like politics today, frankly.
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah.
So Judge Wickersham really was the genesis, or at least named Fairbanks, it sounds like.
Yes. At the time of his appointment to this judgeship, he was 43 years old, and it was kind of his last grasp for the brass ring, a very important position. Charles Fairbanks was a prominent Republican senator at the time. Fairbanks withheld his own personal choice, deferring to Wickersham, and so Wickersham felt indebted to Fairbanks for that favor. And so he named the town Fairbanks. Now, Charles Fairbanks became Teddy Roosevelt's vice president in 1904. And he never did, however, visit Fairbanks, Vice President Fairbanks, but Wickersham visited both Teddy Roosevelt and Vice President Fairbanks in Washington.
And that really goes to his career being the one sole voice for Alaska as a territory, right?
Absolutely. And actually, before Alaska was officially a territory, it was considered a district. It was a military district. And I believe it's approximately 1912, the Organic Act made it a territory and established a territorial legislature. But Judge Wickersham, he proposed on the floor of the U.S. Congress in 1916 Alaska, the proposition for Alaska to achieve statehood. That's 43 years before Alaska did become a state.
Wow.
So he had great foresight, great hopes for the state. I'll also say one of his other most significant contributions was bringing the Tanana chiefs together for a conference in 1915 at our old library down there at First and Cowles, and he brought the chiefs together and wanted to advise them that, look, civilization's changing. There's a whole forces are coming into your land, and now the Tanana Chiefs Conference has become, I believe, the largest Native corporation in our country. So it's quite amazing that he was instrumental in bringing them together.
That's amazing, and to really have that foresight, it sounds like he was definitely a visionary when it comes to many of these different things that we take for granted today.
Absolutely, and he also he later in his life he represented a lot of Native interests down in Southeast Alaska, and establishing rights for their fishing rights for canneries, kind of regulations for that whole industry. So he was definitely a friend of the common man, whether they be Native or non-Native. He spent the latter part of his life in Juneau, Alaska. His first wife had passed away in 1926. He married a widow in Juneau, and he was a practicing lawyer there until 1939, when he passed away at the age of 81. Just a remarkable life.
Yeah, that's amazing. And the Wickersham House is to commemorate that. So we're here with you at the Wickersham House, which is in Pioneer Park, where it was moved, you said, back in the 70s. Is that correct?
The exact date escapes me, but I believe it was in the early 70s. It was after the rest of Alaskaland Pioneer Park was established. I know that. It was probably at some point after the flood when that gas station was built at First and Noble. I don't know precisely, and it's amazing. I worked in the park from 1976 on in various capacities. I personally don't recall ever coming into the Wickersham House until about the year 2000. Which it's just I find that amazing. I probably walked by it 1,000 times and never paid much attention, but people very much enjoy coming in, getting a little glimpse into what home life was like 115 years ago, and we certainly enjoy keeping the place open to the public.
Definitely.
7 days a week now, Memorial Day to Labor Day. Thankfully, we're past the COVID restrictions, and all our staff is vaccinated, and hoping to meet our visitors. We come from all over the world. It's just incredible.
So you said you're open 7 days a week.
Yeah.
What are your hours of operation?
12 to 8.
12 to 8.
7 days a week.
And encourage people to come down, and it is by donation.
It's by
to support the
donation.
mission.
We're not gonna frisk you when you come to the door, but if you can leave $1, it helps pay our rent and utilities and upkeep for the house. and we sure appreciate all. And I can tell you more about the Tanana Yukon Historical Society if you were to stop by here.
Stop by and then see, some of the features that you have in the house here. Pictures from the turn of the century, and then different attributes. And are some of these things from Judge Wickersham's house, or are these just
there are
times?
Some items from Wickersham's personal possessions. This office chair was, we believe, a Wickersham chair. The red chair in the living room was his favorite chair. It's called a Morris chair. It was his favorite chair at his home in Juneau, and you can see cigar burns on the armchair of that red chair. Kind of interesting. And the other thing I want to say is hopefully they'll get that house in Juneau open again. I don't believe it's open right now, but it has been in the past open as a museum. It's a beautiful house. It's the biggest, best house on the highest hill overlooking the Lynn Canal. And he owned that with his second wife, Grace. And the other important thing I want to mention about Judge Wickersham is for all that time in Alaska, 39 years plus, he kept a diary virtually every day. And you can read those diaries online at the Alaska State Library. You can just Google Wickersham diaries, and you can read the original handwritten diaries and the transcriptions next to it. And also, our wonderful historian Terrence Cole, who just passed away this last winter, he edited this new edition of Old Yukon, Judge Wickersham's memoir. And that's just a fascinating resource to take a look at. I became interested quite by accident in Wickersham. I was working on a master's degree at the university, and Terrence Cole and Mary Erlander were my advisors. And I suggested taking excerpts from those diaries and putting a one-man show together, which is how I became interested. So I did that about 2005, and then later on, like 2014, this position of managing this little museum came open, and it was just a perfect fit for me to come and do.
So maybe share us a little bit about yourself. It sounds like you're a bit of a historian.
Well, I'm an amateur historian. And I find the history of Fairbanks and Alaska just utterly fascinating. I came here in the summer of '75, and one of the first books I read was This Old House, a story of Clara Rust, written with Joanne Wold, who I'm sure a lot of folks recall Joanne Wold. And that just remains just a fascinating glimpse of what life was like in the aughts, teens and 20s and 30s in Fairbanks, Alaska, what everyday life was for, just common working class families. And, there's just so much rich history in Alaska that, you can't avoid running into people. Like my dear next-door neighbor, my late next-door neighbor, when she was a little girl in Nenana, the captain of the riverboat Nenana used to give her candy. The history is so immediate and recent. I find that really compelling.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe that Fairbanks wasn't here in the forms of a modern day city, not just that much longer than 100 years ago.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and that so many of those pieces of our history are still here, and we capture many of them here in the park.
Oh yeah, the Pioneer Museum is just an absolutely wonderful museum, and the Kitty Hensley House, and so many things. Right now, they're doing renovations for their beautiful little Presbyterian church right next door to the Wickersham House. So many interesting buildings, and then there's the Air Museum, the Railroad Museum. It's just a lot of history out here, and it's the best deal in town. You come to this park and you have a picnic and see all this stuff for free. And if you got an extra buck or two, put it in a donation box. But there's no great admission charge. It's a great community resource, and people continually tell me, this is amazing for a town this size to have something like this. It's just a great asset.
It's certainly a nugget, a treasure that we have here in town. Well, I guess maybe is there anything else that you'd like to share with folks about upcoming events or what the society is doing as far as to help share information on the Wickersham House and other aspects of history in Fairbanks?
Well, we're working on a kind of a virtual tour, which we hope to have to post online at some later time, perhaps later this summer. And there's also, if you're interested in the Tanana Yukon Historical Society, you can Google that, or it's tyhs@alaska.net. And there's a website with more information. Our president, Ron Inouye, is a retired librarian from the university, and Elizabeth Cook is our secretary treasurer, and she's just been involved with the parks. I mean, literally since day one, 1967, and they've got many projects going on in cooperation with Fort Wainwright, and I believe now the Nenana Railroad Station. They're continually working on various projects.
That's great. Well, Steve, thank you for all that you do here with the Wickersham House, and that all that the society does to preserve these aspects of history in our community. And I guess I just encourage anyone, if you have time to come down to the park, to stop by. Let's see, to the east of the riverboat, and you can't miss the riverboat, next to the church, and just
right across from the gazebo.
Right across from the gazebo, yes.
Yeah,
so come on down, stop by, say hi, and check out a bit of Fairbanks history.
And thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for coming by and giving us a little blurb out there.
That's great. Well, thanks for your time, Steve.
You bet.
Fairbanks, oh Fairbanks.
Thanks for listening to the Alaskaland podcast. We hope you found today's conversation enlightening. For more episodes, listen on your mobile device through your favorite podcast app, or watch at youtube.com/Fairbanks North Star Borough.